A tsunami caused by a volcanic eruption swept across the entire Canary Islands. The lives of millions are in imminent danger. A small boat is desperately rushing towards a safe zone. In a critical moment, they arrive at their destination. Two massive waves crash in simultaneously, perfectly canceling each other out to form a safe area. The survivors on the boat narrowly escaped death. Norway's latest disaster film, La Palma, will take you on a thrilling journey of playing a game with death. On the ocean, a few tourists are on a boat heading to La Palma Island, the westernmost point of the Canary Islands. A young girl jumps into the water to swim, when suddenly, bubbles begin to appear on the surface. Her companion leans on the glass, crying for help, only to see the girl floating away. At this moment, the entire sea surface is boiling. Many people don't know that La Palma Island is a ticking time bomb. In 1949, a volcanic eruption occurred here, creating a crack several kilometers long on the island. Scientists speculate that if a new round of volcanic eruption occurs, the entire mountainside could collapse, sending 500 cubic kilometers of rock sinking to the seabed, and triggering a tsunami that would destroy everything. Even so, tourists continue to flock to the island. On this day, Fred's family of 4 is on vacation on the island. For the past 7 years, they have come to La Palma Island every Christmas, and have never encountered any dangerous situations. On this day, the Geological Survey Office of La Palma Island detected several earthquakes occurring off the southeast coast. The head Alvaro initially didn't pay much attention, until he saw the news about the tour boat disaster in the newspaper. He couldn't help feeling uneasy. Staff member Mary discovered that the newly set measuring instruments had lost signal. To ensure everything was foolproof, Mary and David prepared to go to the site to take a look. As soon as they got out of the car, they encountered 3 travelers preparing to camp. They ventured into the deep mountains. The measuring instruments set up by Mary were inside a cave, aimed at testing whether changes in underground water levels were related to the physical properties of the mountain. The transmitter at the cave entrance showed no signs of malfunction. They put on their helmets and ventured deep into the cave. As soon as they entered, they found water seeping from the rock walls. Mary collected some samples to take back for testing. David then noticed a large number of bat corpses on the ground. He tested the air quality and found that the carbon dioxide levels here were abnormally high. Moreover, there was a new crack above the cave, which was caused by falling rocks damaging the equipment. Mary hurried back to report to Alvaro. The unusual activity indicated signs of volcanic awakening, so she suggested quickly warning the islanders. However, Alvaro believed that one shouldn't force reality into theoretical frameworks until there was absolute certainty. They couldn't cause panic among the islanders and tourists. He immediately called the coroner of the shipwreck victims to further understand the situation. The coroner stated that the bodies had just arrived, and he would notify Alvaro as soon as there was any news. David told Mary that there was a reason for Alvaro's caution. In 2021, he detected unusual volcanic activity, and immediately went public to warn the islanders. This caused panic, and nearly cost Alvaro his job. So unless he was completely certain, he would absolutely not repeat that mistake. That said, Mary was still very uneasy. What if this time it wasn't an illusion? She returned home, where her brother excitedly introduced a new diving project.
See? Here's a turtle forum talking about La Palma. And there were like hundreds of comments. Well, people are really fascinated by them being here all together and traveling in the same direction. That's unusual, apparently.
Mary felt increasingly anxious. She returned to the lab to analyze the water she had brought back from the cave. Generally speaking, rainwater takes 30 years to flow from the mountaintop into the cave. Thus, it absorbs a large amount of minerals as it passes through the rocks. However, the sample contained no minerals at all. This water must have flowed through the mountain in an extremely short time. This could mean that the crack at the cave's top extends directly to the summit. David pulled up a 3D view. He discovered that the location of the cave was directly beneath the crack that appeared in 1949. They rushed up the mountain to verify. As soon as he reached the halfway point, he found a new crack. The two immediately set up measuring instruments for testing. Meanwhile, the autopsy results were in. The deceased travelers had all suffered burns from gases. The carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide levels in their lungs were severely elevated. Additionally, the investigation bureau found that the internal temperature of the mountain was rising rapidly. Alvaro quickly contacted the National Guard to seal off the mountain, preventing tourists from approaching the area. The crack near Mary began to spew hot air. The two quickly grabbed their backpacks and fled. they encountered a family camping on the mountain. Mary went over to warn them. In no time, the mountain was filled with smoke. Mary stumbled down the slope and lost consciousness. Fred's family was actually a blended family. When Jenny was still healing from her emotional wounds, she met the honest and kind Fred. They quickly got married. Their eldest daughter Sarah is Jenny's child from her previous marriage. After marrying Fred, she had a younger son Toby. However, the boy was diagnosed with autism. In recent years, the couple's relationship gradually cooled. Fred felt that he had lost Jenny's heart. In the afternoon, he sat on the balcony feeling sad. He noticed the wine glass on the table shaking violently. Meanwhile, the unconscious Mary quickly woke up in the hospital room. Alvaro was waiting outside. He explained that the mountain was currently only emitting gas. It was uncertain whether this would continue.
You know you have to do something, and you have to do it now.
We are talking about a tsunami warning that affects millions of people on different continents. The evacuation alone could cost billions and could cost human lives if it causes panic.
Alvaro needed more data. He couldn't bear the consequences of another misprediction. Mary recalled that during the 2004 tsunami in Thailand, she and her family were on vacation there. The raging sea swept away her parents. If the authorities had issued a tsunami warning earlier, they might have survived. Therefore, every hour was crucial. Mary hoped Alvaro would carefully weigh the pros and cons. Finally, the two went to the city hall to report the current situation to the mayor's secretary. It was up to them to decide whether to issue a warning. However, the secretary's opinion was the same as Alvaro's, that they shouldn't release information unless absolutely necessary. Alvaro notified the Ministry of Environment in Madrid and sent the research data over, hoping to draw the authorities' attention. Meanwhile, Mary took this opportunity to call her brother Eric and asked him to buy a plane ticket back to Norway as soon as possible.
I've been working a lot, and so I don't have time to look after you. So I'm thinking that you should go home now and get your life together.
This part is very confusing. She could have told her younger brother directly that the volcano on the island might erupt. However, Mary said a lot of hurtful things that she didn't mean. By the time she realized and wanted to apologize and confessed that a tsunami was about to happen on the island, Eric no longer believed her. He thought this was just an excuse for his sister to get rid of him. At the same time, Sarah rushed to the airport. This morning, her mom had another fight with Fred. She could no longer tolerate the oppressive atmosphere, so she used her savings to buy a ticket to Madrid and called her uncle Jens to borrow some living expenses. When Jens heard that Sarah wanted to leave without telling anyone, he hurriedly advised her to calm down. Sarah hung up the phone and boarded the plane. Before takeoff, the girl received a text from a friend. Her friend wanted to meet her. Jens quickly called Jenny, but she was doing yoga and missed the call. At this time, the mountain had begun to erupt with volcanic ash. The plane that was about to take off received the news a bit late, and could only find a way to avoid the ash cloud. However, the pervasive hot gas quickly caused engine failure. Mary looked up, and was startled by the volcanic cloud. Only then did she notice the message from Jens. Mary learned that Sarah had gone to the airport alone. She feared that the plane had already taken off. The doomed plane flew across the sky and crashed onto the mountainside nearby. The couple was completely stunned. They must immediately go to the airport to search for their daughter's whereabouts. On the way, they saw the news report that the doomed plane was a flight to Madrid. All the injured passengers had been sent to the hospital. Fred hurriedly drove to the island's hospital, hoping to see Sarah's figure. Jenny grabbed a police officer and explained her situation. The female officer quickly brought over a passenger list. She said that those marked next to their names had already checked into this hospital. The other passengers were unaccounted for. Jenny quickly found Sarah's name on the list. She was categorized under the missing section. The female officer advised them to prepare mentally. Most of the missing passengers were seated in the front row of the plane, which was where the explosion occurred. The couple returned to the hotel. Fortunately, Sarah sat in the room watching TV with her brother. It turned out that the message from her friend had prompted her to leave the doomed plane at a critical moment. At the same time, Alvaro had already realized the seriousness of the situation, but no matter how he stated it, the mayor's office took no action. Although the airport was now closed, the ferries were still operating. He urged the geological survey staff to evacuate with their families quickly. Alvaro would stay behind to continue monitoring the situation. Mary didn't hesitate and hurried home. Eric had not left the island out of spite earlier, but he got drunk and had a confrontation with the police. Mary wanted to go over and stop him, but she was arrested for disturbing public order. Eric stayed by his sister's side. Only then did he believe that the tsunami was real. he found it hard to accept that the nightmare of years past was about to replay. Mary first apologized for what she had said earlier. She promised that she would ensure Eric's safe evacuation. Jens held an important position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He soon learned that the situation on the island was not good. A series of volcanic eruptions had already destabilized the mountain, enough to cause large-scale landslides and tsunamis. The entire archipelago faced the risk of being destroyed. Although the Spanish authorities were still unclear about when the landslide would occur, it only took a few hours for a landslide to escalate into a large-scale volcanic eruption. So Jens immediately checked the ferry schedules. He found that there was still a ferry to La Palma, although they requested confidentiality regarding the matter. He took the risk to warn Jenny. A tsunami was highly likely to erupt on the island. He urged her to get her family to take the ferry and leave. The last shift would depart in 20 minutes. Jenny knew that Jens was always meticulous in his actions, and would never exaggerate a situation, so she urged her family to gather their things. Sarah was worried about her friend Charlie on the island, but at the critical moment, she couldn't reach her. Jenny couldn't afford to delay any longer. She first took her daughter and left the hotel. Since they couldn't get a taxi, Fred decided to drive away a nearby van. The van's owner rushed over to stop them, but Fred still accelerated and rushed out. The family arrived at the dock just in time. However, the van owner chased after them. As long as he passed through from behind the hotel, his speed was faster than driving. Fred stayed behind to apologize to the van owner, telling his wife to take the kids onto the ferry first. By the time he finally paid the van owner to get rid of him, the ferry had already departed from the shore. Meanwhile, Alvaro, who stayed at the research institute, had truly received signals that the volcano was about to erupt. This time, he didn't hesitate and immediately sounded the alarm. Upon hearing this, Fred was planning to rent a boat to leave. However, after the ticket seller made a phone call to the owner, they suddenly announced that they were suspending operations. Fortunately, a kind traveler nearby invited Fred to leave with him on his fishing boat. Just as they boarded the boat and were about to set sail, a loud bang came from behind them. The dormant volcano erupted after all. A woman came over holding a child, begging for help. No one was willing to give up their chance to survive. However, Fred couldn't ignore the pangs of his conscience. He voluntarily gave his seat to the mother and child. Fred watched the fully loaded boat leave. He found a quiet place to call Jenny, telling his wife to take good care of their two children, no matter what happened next. Hearing this, Jenny felt despondent. At the same time, David, who was in the hospital, also heard the evacuation alarm. He saw people in the hospital fleeing, and guessed that the volcano had already erupted. So he returned to the Geological Survey office at the first opportunity. Alvaro was in his office drinking. He had already sent his family off the island. He had long since put his own life and death aside.
Time for you to get a seat on a boat to Tenerife.
David chose not to leave. Instead, he brought a glass and drank with Alvaro, because the ships on La Palma Island are limited, and not enough to send everyone off the island. The patients in the hospital, tourists, and islanders, all had their own reasons and purposes for surviving. David, being alone and unburdened, shouldn't waste the limited resources. Both of them felt they couldn't die uselessly like this, so they decided to conduct one last field investigation. At this moment, lava was continuously pouring down the hillside. No one knew how much time was left before the landslide would occur. Once the rocks fell into the sea, it would trigger a tsunami threatening the lives of millions. The Spanish authorities quickly established an airlift route to the mainland to help evacuate as many residents of the archipelago as possible. However, December was the peak tourist season, and even with the airlift route, the number of people that could be saved was limited. Jens learned that his brother-in-law was still trapped on the island, and was actively looking for solutions. His superiors were very angry when they found out he had leaked information. If the public learned that a diplomat only contacted his relatives, ignoring the lives of thousands, what would they think? Meanwhile, a researcher named Wave saw the news report and volunteered to help. He could calculate the size and speed of the waves, and which areas met the geographical conditions for safe zones. The staff immediately went to report this information.
A wave researcher?
Yes, he says he can compute where and how the wave will hit.
I don't want to hear this.
Jens rushed out to catch up with the researcher. He asked him to help identify the areas least affected by the wave impact. In fact, Jens had a question as well. The Canary Islands are full of mountains. Why couldn't residents evacuate to higher places to avoid tsunamis? The researcher explained that during a volcanic eruption, the toxic gases and lava released could also endanger lives. The toxic gases often drifted to other islands, and even being at high altitudes posed a life-threatening risk. Jens no longer wasted time, and urged the researcher to calculate the safe zones quickly. Hearing the alarm, Eric hurriedly asked the on-duty officer to release the detainees. The officer replied that he had no authority to do so, and needed to get approval from superiors to release the prisoners. This island was about to be destroyed, and they didn't know how to be flexible. Eric was desperate but felt powerless. Fortunately, not long after, a colleague of the officer arrived. He said the lava was nearly burning the houses in the distance. He pulled the on-duty officer away. Eric took the keys to unlock his sister's cell, and released the other inmates in the detention center. Just as the two rushed out of the police station, Fred stopped them at the door. He said it was useless. All the boats had already left. But Eric suddenly remembered the boat he had used for diving, which was still parked on the beach. Fred immediately perked up, and followed the siblings to the beach to find the boat. Fortunately, the boat was still there. The three quickly dug out the keys, and prepared to set off. A man with a gun emerged, attempting to steal their boat. Eric was unwilling to give up hope so easily, and rushed forward to wrestle for the gun. In the struggle, the gun went off, and shot Eric in the abdomen. He said few words before dying on the spot. Fred felt very guilty. He lunged at the assailant, but was pushed into the water instead. Just as he was about to suffocate, Fred grabbed a rock and struck the assailant. He pushed the assailant under the water until he drowned. Then he picked up the gun, and pulled Mary onto the boat. The assailant's accomplices soon ran to the shore. Fred threatened them with a handgun not to approach. The two rowed the boat away from the shore. They didn't even have time to take Eric's body. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the wave researcher ran simulations 3 times to find a spot on Tenerife Island that would likely avoid the tsunami. This was because 2 massive waves would converge at that location and cancel each other out. Of course, these were just calculations, and still carried a 50% risk. Jens had no choice and quickly took his report to submit it, but his superiors deemed a 50% chance too low. If the Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced this news, but the people who went there died, it would be a terrible public relations disaster. Therefore, they wouldn't announce this so-called safe zone. Meanwhile, Jenny and her 2 children had arrived at the airport on Tenerife Island. The inside was bustling with travelers. They were lucky to catch a flight, and submitted 4 passports, reserving a spot for Fred as well. Just then, Sarah spotted Charlie in the crowd. She told her mom to wait in place, and ran over to find Charlie. Before Sarah could return, the passengers started boarding. Jenny was frantic with worry. She could only board first to comfort her scared son. Fortunately, Sarah had already found Charlie, and gave her the wristband reserved with her father's passport. Alvaro and David reached the volcano's crater. The boiling lava bubbled beneath their feet. The heat waves hit their faces. They gazed at the breathtaking view while chugging wine. In the next moment, the ground shook, and the landslide finally began. The mountain quickly sank into the sea. Just arrived on Tenerife Island. Mary and Fred also felt the impact from the opposite coast. Mary told Fred to wait in place, while she went to find a vehicle. There were only 20 minutes left before the giant wave would hit. Jenny noticed that Sarah hadn't returned. She wanted to take Toby down to look for her daughter. Kind passengers were willing to help look after her son, but Jenny knew that Toby's autism meant he couldn't be away from family. She still took her son off the plane. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs quickly received news of the landslide. They could only postpone the press conference by a few minutes to prepare. Jens made a firm decision. He walked up to the podium alone to announce the coordinates of the safe zone. Even if it cost him his position, he would do his best to give the trapped people a chance to escape. Fred on the coast quickly received the coordinates of the safe zone. Mary returned empty-handed after failing to find a vehicle. She wanted to pull Fred to the airport, but it was already too late. So the two decided to take the risk and head to the safe zone. They moved forward, not daring to look back at the terrifying wave. At the same time, Sarah boarded the plane with Charlie. Just as the plane was about to take off, Sarah remembered to call her mom to report that she was safe. She learned that they were still at the airport, since the phone call went through. Why hadn't she called to ask where her daughter was in the first place? Now it was too late to board. Sarah sent the coordinates of the safe zone. She received on her phone to her mother before hanging up. The airport staff saw the mother and son were helpless. They let them ride with them to the mountains for refuge. Jenny explained that the Norwegian government had sent a series of safe zone coordinates. We should head to this location. The staff said the network was down and they had no maps. I can't find the coordinates. In this crisis moment, Toby's doodle book became very useful. He had previously copied a map of the island. From the coordinates, the safe zone was at Caleta Coast. the three take immediate action. At this moment, the tsunami was about to hit the shore. Fred and Jenny's groups were both desperately heading for the safe zone. The plane took off just at the last moment, but the runway fractured, leaving them stranded halfway. This was the downside of needing to take off. Just as the tsunami approached, the massive waves quickly smashed into the halted plane. Passengers were swept into the water, their fates uncertain. Jenny and her son were desperately running with the convoy. Mary and Fred were also about to reach the safe zone. At a critical moment, their phones lost power. They had to take a gamble and drive in the direction their memories recalled. Two massive waves collided behind the boat, canceling each other out. Mary and Fred were lucky to have survived. The safe zone was gathering some survivors. Everyone wore the same expressions of confusion and helplessness. The waves had washed everything away on the island. Mary suddenly came to her senses. She realized that her only family had once again been taken by the tsunami. Fred sat beside her, feeling heavy-hearted. Suddenly, he heard Toby's voice. His son and wife were running towards them. Fred couldn't help but ask where Sarah had gone, but his wife shook her head, unable to speak. Fortunately, Sarah was still alive. However, Charlie sitting next to her had lost consciousness. The crew members rushed over to provide aid. They finally managed to restore Charlie's heartbeat. As the two exited the cabin, the scene before them was a complete wreck. The National Guard and military personnel were searching for survivors. According to the current data and footage, this tsunami could likely be the largest natural disaster in history. West Africa, South America, the United States, and Europe all experienced varying degrees of impact. Jens was restless in his apartment. Fortunately, a colleague brought good news.
Looks like everybody that made it to the safe spot has survived. And your sister is one of them.
Jens finally breathed a sigh of relief. Sarah successfully reunited with her parents. Mary looked at the reunited family and felt a deep pang of sorrow. She missed the days spent with her brother. Each misjudgment and delayed decision had pushed so many lives toward hell. The film ends here. In fact, it's just the scale of a movie, but for some reason, they felt the need to extend it into a series. The main character's family seemed to have all the luck. Sarah sat by the window and was hit directly by the tsunami but was still fine. Meanwhile, Charlie, who wasn't by the window, at least got a bit dizzy. The entire main cast's intelligence seemed to be in the gutter. Their various actions left viewers anxious. The special effects in the last episode were acceptable, but the overall content was too sparse. If you want to see grand disaster scenes, you might be disappointed.